All right, welcome to Ohio State of Mind with your host, Josh Keatley. Today I have a very special guest and our good friend, the host of Locked On Buckeyes. His show every day, daily, new content, recruiting expert, Ohio State expert, football and basketball, Jay Stevens. Jay, how you doing, my man?
Doing well, Josh. Doing very well. Football season's almost here. I'm excited for that. I'm also excited to be back with you here on the podcast.
Oh, dude, thanks for coming on, man. You know, I love talking to Jay too because we had to hurry up and get the podcast started because Jay and I we'll just start talking and talking and talking about nonsense. But before we really get into it, uh, I want to you're going to be going to Ohio the Big Ten Media Days. I want to have you on during that, and I also you mentioned that you have a series coming up on your podcast, which I thought was just awesome, absolutely awesome, super cool, super nostalgic. You want to talk about it a little bit?
Absolutely. This is a fun little time for myself and different guests to come on the show and really reminisce and get a little nostalgic, as you said, about things that have happened over Ohio State and really think about how much amazing, filthy good talent the Buckeyes have been blessed with. We're drafting the best Ohio State players over the past 20 years. Now, it's not the best. There's a pool, and we have a 10-round draft. We're just selecting the best players position by position. So quarterback, running back, wide receiver, defensive line, linebackers, and DB. Sorry, tight ends. Sorry, O-linemen. You guys are excluded from this draft. I still love you. I talk about you guys on a regular basis. Just in this draft is for those other positions. And so it's fun. We've already recorded the Buckeye draft for the quarterbacks. That's going to be a lot of fun to unveil. I gave the guest the chance. Him and I said at the very end of after 3 rounds, it's a 3-round draft. I said, hey, how about we just go ahead and say who our next pick would be? And we both had the same player about who our next pick would be after a 3-round draft. There's only 2 people on the show for the draft portion of it. The show was hosted solo by myself, but I wanted to get a little nostalgic and reminisce with some of my guys that I do shows with quite a bit throughout the season. And so, yeah, nostalgic, reminisce a little bit. But, man, the Buckeyes have been blessed. I mean, literally, it's really fortunate when you think about how much amazing talent the Buckeyes have. When you think about what Alabama and what Nebraska used to be and what Miami used to be and what Florida State used to be, the Buckeyes have had the same thing as far as talent, if not more, than some of the other schools. And so we get kind of lost. I think I keep saying this phrase, lost in the sauce is, oh, we have this, oh, we have that, or we ripped this guy, we ripped that guy. Take a second to sit back and just realize the Buckeyes have had some of the best talent in the country compiled in Columbus over the past 20 years. That's crazy to think about.
Yeah. The funny part is I was watching some Ohio State football the other day and watching some of these new recruits, and I do think that this might be the best that we this year coming up. This might be the best Ohio State team we've seen in my lifetime. If Knowles can get that defense ever so slightly improved, the talent is there. The talent is there. If they can understand his scheme, I mean, I'm looking at this roster up and down, and it's hard to find a weakness, dude. It really is. But I love that. You know, I know that your show, for those that don't know, Jay runs a very, very distinguished, tight program at Locked On Buckeyes. Me, I'm all willy-nilly messaging people the day before, hey, you want to jump on, all that. But I think it would be a cool idea if I modify, since my show's a little bit messier, what we should do is get a couple other guys in here, just a free-for-all, dude. Just draft an entire Ohio State team, dude, just a free-for-all, you know, because we can go on this show. I know you got time constraints, and, you know, like I said, the Locked On Buckeye show, that's a tight-knit podcast. But here, dude, we can talk for 3 hours, and, you know, my 3 listeners will stick it out with us, Jay. What do you think about that? Would you come off to that, bro?
It'd be a fun time. It'd be a good time.
Yeah,
it would be a good time. Talking any Buckeyes, it's a good time. You're correct.
Oh, yeah.
The podcast is restricted on time. I do talk a lot. I do talk fast at times on purpose. People are like, how do you do that? Well, I only have a certain amount of time to get all this stuff in my brain, spit out into a microphone so it comes through your speakers clearly. And sometimes your boy can ramble and pick up pace like he's running a race or something like that. It's just literally things that happen. But yeah, I mean, Buckeye football, picking players, I mean, quarterback, receiver, lineman. Buckeyes have had amazing guys on both sides of the ball for a very long time.
Dude, that's why you're the best, man. I think last week I had a couple dudes on and we were Googling stuff live on the air. So that's how slow this show could go sometimes. But let's dive into it, dude. We had some pretty big, huge, I might say, Big Ten news. Unfortunately, it came out literally the day after I recorded our last podcast. As you know, it takes a couple days to edit this bad boy. The good people at Around the Gridiron, God bless them. But so USC and UCLA have joined the Big Ten. And on top of that, they are expected to join the Big Ten in football next season. Right? Is that right?
2024, August 2nd, 2024.
I apologize. 2024, which is a year ahead of Oklahoma and Texas that are going to be joining the SEC in 2025. Is that right? Did I get that right? Yeah.
2025, Oklahoma and Texas. 2024, USC, UCLA.
Yeah.
2023, I believe the 4 schools that are joining the Big 12.
You are correct.
BYU, UCF,
Houston,
Cincinnati, and Houston will be in the Big 12.
Yes.
I believe that's the current timetable as far as what's already happened in college football.
So it's a little bit odd that the Big Ten added these 2 West Coast teams. My understanding was that they basically, USC and UCLA, kind of initiated the conversation. They were going to leave the Pac-12. I think this is a great addition. I have no problem with it. The Big Ten, I was screaming for the Big Ten to make a move when the SEC made a move to add Texas, Oklahoma. I think that this is a perfect match. Adding USC is, one of the most historical, prestigious college football programs of all time. I can finally sit back and say that, Matt Leinart is the best Big Ten quarterback of all time. I love it. No, but seriously, in UCLA, even though they're a little bit in a down slump, obviously they're one of the best basketball programs of all time. They've had some hot streaks as far as football goes. When you look back at, they had guys like Troy Aikman, Deshaun Foster. They've had moments in the sun a little bit. Tommy Maddox. So I think it's a great addition. I don't think that there could have been a better addition than UCLA. There's a couple other schools I would have rather had, but as far as the grand scheme and the prestige, I think USC knocks it out of the park. Obviously, this puts a little kink in the Big Ten being a Midwestern conference. But before I kind of give my opinion, we dive into the realignment of the actual conference. What do you think? How do you feel about those two schools coming to the Big Ten?
It's weird, man. It's really weird. I am a person that when I grew up falling in love with college football, I loved the regional aspect of it. And I've heard people say this all the time, and I was at one point thinking like, no, it doesn't make sense, but it makes absolute sense. One of the reasons people love college football, there's a couple of reasons. One, it's different than the NFL. 2, you get to fall in love with your region of the country, get to fall in love with a school in said region, and either love or hate or be in the middle with the conference that's in your region as well. So the regional aspect of college football has always been there. There's a reason why it's called Pac-12 After Dark, and Pac-12 football on the West Coast is viewed that way, partly because of the time zone that they're in. Big 12, Texas, Oklahoma, a certain part of the country. The SEC, the Southeastern Conference, a certain part of the country that's really found a way to capitalize on the fandom, the extreme fandom that's down there in the South as far as how they view football. And it's not just college football. NFL football and even high school football are huge in the South, just like they are in the state of Ohio. And so there are amazing things that happen when you're able to look at just the regional aspect of it.
Yeah.
So my entire life, regional. I realized years ago the regional aspect would be going away at some point, and it goes back to the Big Ten adding Rutgers and Jersey, adding Maryland, adding Nebraska, going further out west. Some people say Nebraska is Midwest. I would argue and say no. It's kind of like in no man's land, but you're still adding schools that you're stretching your footprint. Many people might forget the Big Ten at one point literally had 10 teams in it. But then when conference realignment happened in the early 90s, due to people formulating how they're going to figure out a national champion, Penn State was one of the schools that left the independent ranks of college football and joined the Big Ten. Florida State left the independent ranks of college football, I believe joined the ACC. Miami left the independent ranks, joined the Big East. So conference realignment is not new to people. It's just weird, man. It's real. And even the Big East, the old Big East, going from UConn down to Miami, like that's weird to me. Like not the old Big East, but the Big East in like the 90s and stuff. That's really weird to me. But this is different. Like I say all that to say this on purpose. Going out to Southern California, and saying Ohio State's going to play the Trojans, Ohio State's going to play the UCLA Bruins maybe once or twice every 4 years. That's weird. That's really weird. I do think it's going to make the Big Ten a stronger conference. I think it's more competition for the Buckeyes, but it is really, really weird to think that the football team is going to play not only one of the most prestigious and biggest brands in college football in USC, they're also going to play UCLA, which is not a bad football brand, not a bad brand at all.
No.
And also playing the Rose Bowl more often, Rose Bowl Stadium. I guess I'm saying this stuff out loud. I told you, I haven't really shared many opinions about conference realignment. So you're kind of lucky. I feel honored to be on this podcast to say it. This is weird. This is absolutely weird. And it's not done yet. Conference realignment is not done. They're going to change. They're all going to alter the playoffs, and that's going to lead to more conference realignment. Potentially, creating a governing body to rule the sport. That's going to change conference realignment. Like teams moving around and going to different conferences, we're not going to see the end of it. And until they get a formula that they fall in love with and that they believe is it, and they stop changing it every 5 years when somebody gets mad, that's going to be the only thing that's going to stop college football, conference realignment. They keep changing this format about how they're going to change, figure out a national champion in the sport. They're going to keep getting conference realignment because more schools will say, I have a better chance at winning a national championship in this conference versus the one that I'm currently in.
Yeah, I agree with you. The regional thing kind of went out the window. Back in the day, back before we were even alive, Ohio State would recruit primarily guys from Ohio, Pennsylvania. So I feel like the regional thing kind of went away a little bit before the age of internet recruiting. You look at the 90s, like guys like Michael Wiley. I recently talked to him. He says he never even watched an Ohio State game before he actually went to Ohio State because they just didn't play him out in California,
right?
So, and then you saw Cooper going out and recruiting more nationally. And I use Ohio State as a jumping point because that's what I'm most familiar with. But one can make the strong assumption that most colleges were probably the same way. That's probably when, national recruiting came out. Then you had the early 2000s where everything was online. As far as that way. And then all the games were on cable. You could watch literally every college football game there was starting in the early 2000s. So that kind of does away with a lot of the regional stuff. I'm okay with that. You see a lot of the small conferences. When I went to college, I played the Pioneer Football League, and it was known the big, horn that they like to toot and big muscle they like to flex was that it was the largest conference geographically because we had to go out to San Diego and out to New York and down to Florida, and that was kind of a glimpse into what you were going to see as far as big time college football too. So I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with saying F you to the regional aspect. I do think it should play some role. I've made a couple remarks about some teams that I would like to see, and I'd be lying if I didn't have a feeling that if I didn't make those decisions based off of the regional aspect, but you got to say no. You got to compete with the SEC too. It's all about getting those massive TV contracts. People want to watch USC, UCLA. You got to keep up. So I have no problem with it. The SEC kind of broke the barrier as well when they added Missouri and Texas A&M. Right, those were teams that were further out west and not necessarily. Missouri's not really in the South. I mean, it kind of is, but not really. Right. So I don't have an issue with it. It is odd, but I honestly don't even know what other teams you could have added to make as big as an impact. Clearly, the Big Ten accepted this because they want that footprint out in California, out in LA. I mean, obviously, you could have added a team like Notre Dame, probably been a relatively large splash, and they're right there in the original Big Ten footprint. But I mean, there's really not a bigger splash than adding USC, and honestly, UCLA's had a much better football program as of recently since Chip Kelly's been there than USC. So I think it was a good addition. I mean, overall, are you happy about it, or because obviously we both have some nostalgia talking about the way things used to be, but both of us seems like both of us understand where it's going and what needed to happen. So are you happy with this decision, or was there a more ideal situation that you believe could have happened, or what?
When it comes to the brand, if there's a brand that I'm ranking that's up for grabs as far as where they currently are, them leaving their conference, and be realistic about it, USC's on my list because I realized after 2020, the Pac-12 probably would not be the same conference as it was based off how they handle things during that time period. You got to have USC, you got to have Notre Dame, and you got to have Clemson. I don't really think
Clemson a big brand though.
It's one of those tiers. So Clemson is more to me like a Georgia. Georgia's been really, really good, but they're not one of the upper echelon schools in college football to me. Now, my list
Like you
may be
talk about
different than
history.
yours. Yes, in history, over the landscape of it, Clemson and Georgia are more of the same similar programs. Just Georgia won a national championship more recently. But if you look back over the past years, Georgia and Clemson used to have a heavy, heavy rivalry. I actually interviewed a guy on the Jay Stevens podcast, Troy Sadowski, who was a Walter Camp All-American in the 1988 season. And I talked to him before last season. I said, what are your thoughts about Georgia and Clemson playing this year? He's like, I'm glad they're rekindling the rivalry. And he went on to talk about how those two teams playing was very, very fierce. You played in the first game of the year, and you knew it's going to be a heavyweight bout. And so maybe I'm weird. I do think that Clemson and Georgia are probably more on the same wave. But I think Clemson could be leaving the ACC. But I think if there's brands, you got to go after USC and Notre Dame. Like, you have to do that.
I think you convinced me too. The Clemson thing, you're probably right. Because Clemson, you think of Dabo Swinney. First of all, they've been dominant the last 20 years. So what more do you want, right? 20, that's 2 decades where they've dominated. I don't have images. When you think of Georgia football, I think of Herschel Walker. I think of Matthew Stafford. I think of guys that were maybe more prominent. I can probably name a player from every decade of their dominance. Clemson, I can't really do that. But that doesn't mean that they're any less of a historic program. So I think I'm with you. I think Clemson would be a big ad for sure. But I'm sorry, I interrupted. Go on.
No, you're good. You're good. So I do think when it comes to brands and who you could possibly get, you have to go after USC. You have to go after Notre Dame. Remember, the Big Ten could have had Texas and Oklahoma, because if I remember right, Texas and Oklahoma were thinking about going to another conference prior to the SEC before reaching out to them. And the Big Ten kind of just flopped that thing. They were kind of like, not really. No, we don't want you. I'm like, you could have Texas and Oklahoma, 2 schools that have one of the biggest rivalries in the sport, and you're going to turn that down? So you kind of had to say yes. You kind of had to say yes to USC and UCLA. And this is also a possibility. It's not the question. This thought came into my mind. If you want Notre Dame, you want to have one of their rivals in your conference, so it's easier to schedule that game. Me thinking out loud, Notre Dame and USC play either in the middle of the season or the end of the season every year. The Stanford game is always opposite of that, and it's always that game, either Stanford or USC, depending on the year. It's always in California based on the weather, while whoever Notre Dame hosts that year, that game is in South Bend, once again, based for the weather. And so it's easier to get Notre Dame if you have one of their rivals in the conference, just like it's easier to get UCLA or USC if it's a package deal with somebody else. Rivals move together. I would not have been shocked if in 2020, Ohio State, Michigan said, we're going independent. We're going to go ahead and do an independent schedule. And it also helps them schedule that game at the end of the year. So you're not saying, well, your game, if we're in different conferences, doesn't fit into our schedule. Trust me, I thought about this stuff a lot. USC, UCLA, does it make sense? Yeah, with the way that college football is going. I don't think it's done. I would not be surprised if the Big Ten added another major brand here really soon.
Oh, so you think that we're going to talk about the same thing within this calendar year, within 2022 or 2023 or 2024? What are you seeing? What's your vision of the
probably
future?
Next 6 months, maybe next 2 weeks.
Okay.
I do see the Big Ten adding another school. I know they're trying to go after Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's kind of on the outside looking in instead of on the inside looking out in regards to this conversation. But you have to. Like, you don't just say we don't go out there and get Notre Dame. You have to do everything in your power to try to pull Notre Dame from the independent ranks to come to the Big Ten. Monetarily, it makes sense. Regionally, it makes sense. Rivalry-wise, it makes sense. I could keep going on. Recruiting, it makes sense. You're taking a school in South Bend, Indiana, and I live in Indiana. That's nothing there. Nothing's in South Bend. I can get there in 2.5 hours just driving basically straight up north. There's absolutely nothing here. All of a sudden, you have this 80,000 seat stadium, this football program that's one of the best in college football history. Then all of a sudden, it's like, well, wait, they make their own schedule. They have a deal with NBC. They don't play your traditional like schedule of college football? No, you bring them in. You absolutely have to. It's one of those things you need to do. You're not getting Alabama. You're not getting Texas or Oklahoma. You're not getting Georgia. You might get Clemson. You're probably not getting Miami or Florida State. You're probably not getting Florida.
I don't know. I'm not too sure about that, though. I think if they really wanted to, they could dip. I don't know if they're going to, but they could dip in. So, because if you go out and you go to California, what's stopping you from going to Florida? If SEC is not picking up the phone to call Florida State, and the Big Ten does, you think the Florida State says no? I don't think they should. I'm on your side. I think that your top two targets should probably. I think that Clemson should probably be your top target. I think I like Utah a little bit more than Notre Dame. I like to add another layer to the Western footprint, so those two schools out there aren't lonely. And Utah's a good football program that plays kind of Big Ten football. But whatever, I got to get off topic. But you don't think that those Florida schools, Florida State, Miami, will pick up the phone with the Big Ten called?
They'll pick up the phone. They won't be on very long. I do believe that.
Really?
I think that you got Florida. Once again, remember I talk about how the rivalries matter?
Yeah.
The SEC allows, and they really accommodate their schools in regards to rivalries and things like that at the end of the year with scheduling. I think if you get Florida State and Miami, if they had their chance between going to the SEC or the Big Ten, they're picking up the Big Ten's call. They might only talk to the Big Ten for 5 minutes while they talk to the SEC for 50. I think those two schools, Florida State and Miami, their first option is the SEC all the way. It's the better football conference. It's a more reputable conference in football. You're going to get more national attention, and you're going to be playing one of your rivals every year once again. So the state of Florida can all once again be right there in the same area and be in the same conference. So it's more of a fierce competitor, fierce battle. You're not just playing each other for just state pride and to get the upper hand of the state. You're literally playing for a chance to play in your conference championship game. So I firmly think, even though Florida State and Miami are currently in the same conference, I still think if the Big Ten calls, they pick up, but they're not on the phone very long. I think the SEC has a great chance to, I'm going to say a few schools. I don't know where this came from, but we're just going on.
Let's do it.
The SEC has a great chance to pick up Florida State, pick up Miami, pick up Clemson. The next thing is, do they go after North Carolina and Duke? Great brand in Clemson, great football brands, great brand in Florida State, great brand in Miami. North Carolina and Duke automatically raise up your level of basketball play in the conference, which is the only other money-making sport that's out there. Outside of that, you're going to have your Olympic sports that don't make any money.
No.
But once again, the SEC, if they stay close, they're doing a whole lot of things that Big Ten schools are not doing, because these Olympic sports, they're out here dumping out a lot of money, a lot more money and travel because they're going to Southern California. Whereas Texas or Austin, Texas to Miami, it's far. But how often would that happen? Probably not very often, as far as you're going to have a lot of these other schools, Rutgers, Jersey, going across the country to Southern California. Buddy, that's a long haul. And so I do think the SEC wants to stay at least somewhat regional. I know you're going a little bit west with Texas or Oklahoma, but those brands make sense in football and outside of football. But yeah, the SEC is probably going to go after and probably going to get Florida State, Miami, Clemson. Do they get North Carolina and Duke? The Big Ten, to me, should go after North Carolina and Duke to raise up the level of basketball. I just don't think they're going to do that.
So I think you got some interesting points, but I do think that money, in the grand scheme of things, I think it's all about the money. And
Yes.
I think that the Big Ten is going to have a larger TV contract at the end of this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that Miami and Florida State are going to be running away from the ACC. First of all, I don't exactly think that Miami is a coup. I don't think that that's like the greatest addition in the world either. That football program hasn't been good in 20 years. I don't think it's a huge athletic department. I don't think that I don't think that they have boosters that just funnel money in there like you see the bigger programs like Ohio State and USC. You know, they got a couple boosters that are kind of shady. Miami just doesn't. They don't have that cachet. Florida State, though, has a rich history. They have a giant athletic department, not just in football, but in basketball, baseball. You're adding to your footprint of multiple sports. So I can see a fist fight, an all-out, drag-out fist fight over Florida State. I'm thinking that Clemson's probably going to be the next domino to fall. I just think that at the end of the day, you're going to go where the money goes. So if the Big Ten calls, I think that they'd be more willing to listen. I think the ideal situation is if the Big Ten adds Clemson, and then those ACC dominoes start to fall. That's when you might see. I mean, if Clemson's already in the Big Ten and you're Florida State, you play Clemson. You know, who's to say that that's not an important rivalry to them or whatever?
Right,
you know what I mean?
right,
Like I don't,
right.
you know, Miami. I don't see Miami as being a big fish. I could see Florida State being a big fish, even though they haven't been very good since Jameis Winston. But I don't know if Miami's a very big fish. But we'll see. Notre Dame's another big fish. There's still some stragglers in the Big 12 that I wouldn't hate to add. Oklahoma State, of course. You back to the rivalry point. Oklahoma left, said "F you" to Oklahoma State. Not a care in the world to Oklahoma State in that rivalry. But I guess that wasn't as big as the Red River Shootout. But Oklahoma State, I mean, they played good football. They played good football for a long time. They got some guys that played. Barry Sanders, Thurman Thomas. I mean, it goes way back there. I don't think that that's a dumb ad. That's another, you can make it a regional rivalry with Nebraska. Another team that I would add about the West Coast. I talked about Utah already, adding Oregon. So that, there's more. You got that West Coast footprint. Oregon adds to that. Those are some other schools that I could see added. Did you have any more out? Anything else? Any other schools that you think the Big Ten should pick up the phone and see what's going on?
So in regards to No. Oregon. I saw something a few days ago. Actually, it was Tuesday of this week. And it looks like Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports reported that the Big Ten is in deep discussion to add multiple Pac-12 schools, including a potential merger. Some of the schools that are involved: Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, Oregon, Utah, and Washington. And so I think the Big Ten flopped in regards to Oregon and Washington. Because I would have loved to add both of those schools. I think people forget how big of a brand Washington used to be and how they were actually. I think they won a national championship in the early '90s. If it was late '80s, early '90s, they won a natty back then. But Washington's brand of football is amazing, but it's very regionalistic. It's very regional as far as how Washington football is viewed. Not that amazing consistently, but they have been in a few Rose Bowls recently. I think Ohio State played them in the Rose Bowl recently. Was it 2018, maybe? Urban's last game. I think it was when they were in the Rose Bowl.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, because they had it wasn't John Ross. It was maybe it was John. It might have been John Ross.
I forget.
Dante Pettis. It was Dante Pettis.
Yes. So you got Washington there. I think you should have added them because they were already coming to you. But then you got Oregon, who the Big Ten could have flopped with because Oregon has Nike money with Phil Knight.
Yeah, Oregon's
the owner of Nike. So sure. I'm like, if money is what's fueling this, I get you at Notre Dame, and I understand why Notre Dame's a bigger fish in the pond than the other two schools. But you don't flop when you have two schools coming to you that are major brands, major money makers in their area that can make you more money and say, how about we go with Notre Dame only? Should have just made it all three of them. Like, don't mess this up. Because if you mess it up, you could be on the outside looking in, making more money still, but still not be in the playoff conversation like you want to be at the end of the year. And so other schools, I know I keep going on, North Carolina and Duke need to be schools the Big Ten needs to go after. Absolutely. Really? Yes. And you may say, Jason, it's a football conversation. To me, it's deeper than that. Because conference realignment is not only about football. It's about every sport. If the Big Ten wants to up their level of basketball play, and I'm only going to focus this on the money-making sports right now, go get North Carolina and Duke. You're bringing in one of the fiercest rivalries in college basketball. No, excuse me. The best rivalry in college basketball. You're bringing that to your conference. Major money maker. ESPN dumps money into these schools, into broadcasting these games. And they even discuss the nostalgic aspect of it, the history of these schools. You bring in those two schools, and then you have to realize, do you go out west? Do you stay where you currently are? Do you go down south, or do you only stay with Notre Dame? Because I think if you add North Carolina and Duke, and then I say they should go after Florida State and Miami. I don't think they will. Go after Notre Dame. They have an NBC contract. I know it would be weird for the Big Two to cut a deal and say, well, you can keep your NBC contract. You got to play a few games on the Big Ten network and make it work that way. But make it work. Like, it's not a crazy idea to sit here and say the Big Ten can allow Notre Dame to keep their NBC contract and join the conference, which makes your conference stronger, makes you more reputable, and to get more recognition in these conversations about the playoff. And it firmly allows you to add one of the biggest brands in college football, one of the only schools that's been successful from the infancy stages of college football to today. And
Yeah.
so Notre Dame should be up there. The two schools in North Carolina should be up there. Florida State and Miami should be up there. Yeah, I'm going with name brands on purpose because at this point, the Big Ten needs to go after name brands and bring those schools to the conference.
So the only school on the West Coast. So you don't have any in your top five. In your top five on your top five wish list, you have no schools from the West Coast.
I would go Oregon, Washington, success. I'd probably put a tie. I can't because I want Florida State and Miami for football. But Miami's not the best at football. Florida State just brings it. Florida State's getting better, but Oregon and Washington are better brands for football specifically. It's weird, man.
I have no idea where we're waiting. Yeah, I think because Washington has a pretty large athletic department too. I don't. Man, it'd be interesting to see the numbers what they're looking at too, like compared to like Miami. It would be interesting. But
Miami's in a bad spot.
You don't like Utah either because I like Utah. Utah is at the top of my.
I had no problem with Utah at all. I like combos. Which you kind of see that with how I'm discussing this.
Yeah, so
I like combos.
That's what I'm saying. My next two would be Utah, Oregon. That would be my next two. Those would be my next two fishes.
I would have loved Utah, BYU over Utah, Oregon because
Really?
It's weird. I'm saying and everything I'm going to say is going to be combos or rivalries. I would have loved Oregon State or Washington State to keep the rivalry aspect there. But I think that Oregon and Washington are two bigger fish in the pond, and they bring more to the Big Ten than Oregon State or Washington State does, which is why I'm going Oregon and Washington at that point. Florida State and Miami do a lot for you down there in the South, and they actually allow your conference to recruit better in the South by you adding Florida State and Miami. Outside of Ohio State, Indiana sometimes has success down there in South Florida. But not many Big Ten schools can really go down south and recruit consistently. A lot of the elite talent down there. It's weird saying Indiana can, but Tom Allen used to coach down there, and he has a lot of ties down there to the south, which is why I do think that is why he's able to recruit those guys down there. But I do think, man, Notre Dame's number one. I have North Carolina, and Duke up there because I think that's a realistic get, and then Oregon, Washington, probably next 4-5. Florida State, Miami, 6-7. I could even flip the two, the Florida State, Miami, and Oregon, Washington. I would be perfectly fine there. Because I think all those schools add more to you than just football, which is what I'm going for. I'm not just going football-centered gets and additions. I'm going to things that help me in multiple athletic departments in the conference.
See, I don't know anything about that. I feel like I have a pretty solid idea of how large some of these athletic departments are based off the number of sports they are, have how good they are at other sports. As far as I believe that football does drive the bus, though. I think that there's probably a restriction like, okay, hey, this athletic department is too small, but like Cincinnati. Cincinnati plays top-notch football, and they played top-notch football long enough. And I'm talking even before Luke Fickell got there, even back to the days when Brian Kelly was there. Cincinnati does play top-notch football. Their stadium's not super small and pathetic. They got they have some swagger. That program does have some swagger to them, right? But the problem is I believe that football program is so small. That college is so small that there's probably and the Big Ten already owns that market with Ohio State, but as far as like North Carolina and Duke, I just don't know the impact that I don't know how much they care about basketball, right? Because Kansas is out there. Kansas is sitting out there in purgatory. You're talking about a team that's probably going to be an independent once the Big 12 folds. And there's literally no basketball team that's better than Kansas. So you would think that someone would have snatched them up already. So I don't know. I don't know what the value is in basketball. I don't know what they care. I don't know. I guess there's a lot of variables. I'm not sure about what's needed. There's also a lot of fuel to the fire as far as everybody talk about those AAU schools, which is the academic accredit. What is that? I can't remember.
I don't know what it stands for. I don't. I heard about it. I was like, oh, so what if I academics over? Okay, it's going to sound weird. It's going to sound really weird.
Universities.
We're valuing academics over money and academic and athletic achievement. That sounds really weird for me to say. Because I've never known athletic departments to really value academics over money. I've never known that in my lifetime.
But
here we are.
the people that make the decisions, ultimately the school presidents have to vote on it. And every Big Ten team at the time of their enrollment was a part of the AAU.
Yes.
Nebraska is the only one that's not a part of the AAU anymore. And their license, and I believe their license was only taken away because technically their university hospital is a part of Nebraska Omaha, which is a branch or something silly like that. So I don't know. I would assume that when push comes to shove, even the presidents would see dollar signs and understand that, hey, this is the way of the world. Because I don't think Clemson's AAU. If you're looking at AAU schools, you're looking at like Kansas and Georgia Tech, right? I mean, we can look at a list real quick. But
so somebody said that the Big Ten should go after it an Atlanta school, and I get Georgia Tech, but how does Georgia Tech benefit you on the field or on the court in basketball
I don't know.
Football? I don't see it. Georgia Tech's getting better. They've gone away from the triple option offense now that they have a new coach, which has been really good for them. But monetarily, the only appeal for them is the TV market. That's the only appeal for Georgia Tech.
You're not going to win that footprint because Georgia's got that, right? You know what I mean? Because Georgia outweighs Georgia Tech.
But
right?
they want the TV money. That's all they care about.
I just don't know.
I agree. I 100% agree with you. Georgia is the bigger fish in the bigger appeal down there in Georgia than Georgia Tech is. But Georgia Tech's in Atlanta. And I think the Big Ten only cares about TV markets, which is why they went out to Jersey, got a little bit of maybe a little bit of New York. You go over there to Maryland, you go over there by the nation's capital in D.C., and you go out there to Southern California. At the time and even now, Rutgers and Maryland don't really add much on the basketball court or football field for you. UCLA and USC add value on both the basketball court and football field for you. Georgia Tech, I don't see it. Notre Dame is one of those weird schools, and I keep saying, going back to you, they add things on the football field. In basketball, they have a good following, a decent following, because their fan base is all over the country, which is maybe weird to say, but Notre Dame is a national brand, just like Ohio State. And so that's kind of where I am, where I'm like, are you really wanting the TV money to be so big and you want that to fuel you that you don't care about adding competent teams to your conference that can be competitive on the field? Like, I want to be competitive. I want to compete. I have a podcast somebody asked you recently about Locked On Buckeyes and what some of the goals are. One of them may have startled them, but it was some things I did via research on the YouTube. And I said, let's make this a goal. I am competing with other people while competing with myself to make the show better. That makes sense to me. I'm not going to knock those guys down, and I'm not going to say they do bad jobs, but I'm competing with other people and myself to make this show better. That's what you do. But we're going to bring in Georgia Tech. At what point, unless you want to go back to the 90s and the 80s, maybe early 2000s, and say, well, Georgia Tech did this, Georgia Tech did that. At no point in my lifetime has Georgia Tech ever been in the running to win a national championship. And all of a sudden, want them to come into our conference and make us, they don't make you better. But the TV money might rule and might dictate this. Just like if you bring in Notre Dame, you're bringing in a brand, but ultimately you want that money. You want the money that they have because Notre Dame makes a lot of money.
So I do have the list of AAU schools pulled up.
It's a lot. I've seen it before. It's quite a few.
It's not that big because for instance, they have Yale and MIT. Well, that's not gonna right. So you got Arizona, who's out there, Utah, Kansas, North Carolina, like you said, Oregon, Tulane, Rice, Buffalo, Pittsburgh. That would be one I would add. Cal, Stanford, Duke. There's another one that you mentioned. Virginia, Washington, Georgia Tech, Colorado. I know, right? That's a very.
So I didn't say this earlier, and people may have been like, "Jay, well, you were talking about rivalries. When you're talking about adding different schools, you mentioned Notre Dame, you mentioned Florida State, Miami, you mentioned Oregon, Washington. Excuse me. Who did I mention? I did mention Oregon, Washington. I didn't mention Notre Dame and Stanford, and those two are still rivalries. I think athletically, Stanford doesn't bring what the other schools bring, but it does bring in a school that academically fits what the Big Ten wants to accomplish, and then 2, it adds Notre Dame, a rival with Notre Dame to really say Notre Dame. The only thing that you're missing right now is you. We have your 2 rivals you have in Stanford and USC. You have rivalries in the past with Michigan State, Michigan, and Purdue. That's 5 teams right there that you're going to be playing every single year. You can even keep that same. We don't have to put you in a division. You can play your rivals every year and use that as your schedule. All of a sudden, how about we just add you? You keep your NBC contract. We take some money from that, and just run with it. I mean, if you want Notre Dame, you have to make it appealing for them to come to you because they are a fish that people are going after.
So here's the thing about Notre Dame, though. Don't you think that they're going – because right now Notre Dame is they're making their own decision, right? Because they want their individual contract, yada, yada, yada. Don't you think they're going to drown? Because eventually there's going to be 2 18-team conferences. It's going to be the Big Ten and the SEC.
I don't think they're going to drown. And it goes back to what's happened in college football over the past 30 years.
Okay.
If you go back to, and I've looked this up, so I'll try not to make this like a nerd moment. If you go back to the start of when they started to formulate a game, which is the national championship, it's only like 30 years old. I think the first one was in 1992 or 1991 was the first time they had a national championship game. But it excluded the Pac-10 and the Big Ten because those schools said we are in the Rose Bowl, and the Rose Bowl was not involved a part of this bowl coalition, bowl alliance where they were formulating and trying to figure out a true national champion. Well, Notre Dame at that time had a chance to join the conference, and they did not. Now, granted, you might say, Jay, well, they haven't won many bowl games since that time. We are talking about Notre Dame football right now in 2022, and they have gone on a pretty long drought of not winning a national championship. If you want to talk about Georgia and Clemson, well, before Georgia won it last year, they had gone on nearly a 40-year drought of not winning a national championship. What's the one difference that they had? Georgia's in the SEC. Notre Dame is not. Notre Dame is always going to be one of the most recognizable teams in college football. And even though they might drown maybe monetarily, I still think they're going to be a very recognizable brand. And they're not going to be like some of the other schools that need to be in a conference, need to be with other schools to keep them recognizable, keep them reputable, keep them at the top of the conversation. Notre Dame's always going to be there. You may say, Jay, you're being a little crazy. To me, Notre Dame is always going to be there. The only thing that might get them knocked out compared to other schools is if Notre Dame loses, they are fighting a tough battle to get into the playoff in a 4-team playoff right now. If it goes to 8 or 12, they'll probably be in the playoff with 1 loss, which benefits Notre Dame. So if Notre Dame stays out and they want to keep that thing about being an independent and keep that and wear that badge of honor, they're not going to look. They'll be fine monetarily. They'll be fine. They'll still be successful. They're still killing it on recruiting. I think Marcus Freeman will do some good things there at Notre Dame. I don't think they're going to get lost in all this. Honestly, expansion of the playoff and them even expansion of the playoff helps them, and it doesn't entice them to go to a conference. The only thing that's going to help them is money. That's it.
But the playoffs haven't expanded yet. I don't know. I don't think you're wrong.
Yet. They haven't expanded yet.
I don't think that you're wrong. I think that there's a difference between I don't think you're wrong, but it's like if they're coming down. The Notre Dame, the reputation of Notre Dame in the past is coming down. They don't win big games. They don't get. I mean, shit. They didn't get in the playoffs over Cincinnati, and they probably 20 years ago
didn't they lose
probably
to Cincy?
Would have, huh?
Did they beat Cincy this year?
No, Cincy beat them.
But that's what I thought.
10 years ago, 15 years ago, no one would have gave a shit, and they would have put Notre Dame in. I don't know. I mean, I just think that they're losing some of that cachet. And then if you're talking about super conferences, let's say that the SEC gets 18 teams, the Big Ten gets 18 teams. Well, I just don't know where you're talking about schedules expanding, because everybody's gonna have to play 10 conference games or whatever it may be. Notre Dame, eventually they're not just gonna be able to go to the playoffs because they beat teams like BYU. Eventually the Big Ten is probably going to be the place if there's 18 goddamn teams in the conference where they have to say, no, dude, Michigan can't schedule you. Sorry, you're not in the conference. I don't know. I just foresee that being an issue. I think it's going to be harder for them to make the playoffs than maybe we're thinking, because those two conference champions are getting in for sure. And then
Think about this though. Notre Dame's had a hard time getting in the playoffs with 4. Their athletic director, Jack Swarbrick, is actually in those conversations, in those rooms, making some of those decisions. And I bet you he's a pusher, a proponent of playoff expansion to help Notre Dame. One of the things that hurt Notre Dame over the past 10 years is them deciding to play 5 ACC games every single year. That drastically hurt them because their schedule was a lot tougher before they're playing teams like Pittsburgh and Virginia Tech every single year. If you're playing your old schedule, where you're playing a Michigan State, a Michigan, Purdue is not the best school, but still you're playing these teams every single year, then you add in a couple more tougher opponents that are national break. Trust me, their old schedule was a lot tougher than it is right now, which I think that hurt them in preparation for the playoff and for the final stretch of the season, because they're playing a weaker schedule right now. People knock the Ohio State a lot of times for maybe one loss. The Big Ten is not the best conference at all. It's better than the ACC, but the Big Ten is not the best conference. If Ohio State had one loss but still played a really tough schedule, they're going to be recognized a whole lot different than they are right now. I still think Notre Dame playing the ACC schedule is hurt them.
But the Big Ten is the second best conference.
Ooh.
I mean, wouldn't you agree? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, by far, you got the SEC, the Big Ten, and then literally it's a crapshoot from there. I mean, the Big 12 sucks. The Pac-12 sucks. I mean, shit, you can make an argument that the ACC is better or the AAC is better because you got Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF. You got a couple teams that can at least goddamn sling the ball, score points. Because Clemson was not good last year. They still won 10 games. I don't know. I guess we'll see. You have a little bit more rosy view of the Notre Dame than I do. I don't know how long they can stare down the gun. Because that to me, that's what's happening. Is that there's going to be super conferences. Someone compared college football to be the AFC and the NFC, and it seems like it's going that way.
I don't think it'll go that far.
How many more teams do you need before it is that far, though?
It's not so much the teams. There's still regional aspects in the AFC and NFC. College football, if you want to go that route, even if it's the Big Ten versus the SEC, you're still if you go that far. College football will still go back to the regional aspect that I talked about at the beginning of the show, because you're going to have to. The AFC and NFC still have 3 divisions that are regionalistic in their structure.
Yeah.
The Big Ten of the SEC.
But where does that leave Notre Dame? That's my point. Where does that leave Notre Dame?
It doesn't matter.
So you think that even if Notre Dame has to survive on a schedule where they play Buffalo, Western Michigan, and BYU for 10 straight weeks, they can make it into the playoffs?
They wouldn't do that.
I mean, who are they going to schedule? I just think that
they've been independent. They've been independent, I think, their entire lifetime of a football team. Don't quote me on that part. I don't know for sure, but they have been just fine scheduling.
But there's never been super conferences. There's
the conferences don't hurt their scheduling. It doesn't, because conferences know, and they're able to schedule these home and home games. You want Notre Dame on your schedule.
So if you think that if the Big Ten expands to 18 teams and the SEC expands to 18 teams, that the scheduling for those conferences doesn't change at all?
No, why would it?
Because you got to play more conference games. You got to eliminate.
Okay, what are you going to do? Play 10? You may play 10 conference games.
Sure.
You're still going to play your non-conference games. You're going to play
one. Now you got 2 non-conference games now.
You're going to play one power.
Are you?
Hopefully one tougher. Hopefully you're playing one tougher, and then you're probably playing a group of 5 school. You're going to have to. You cannot play 10 conference games and then not want to play a tougher But even then, a lot of these conferences are going to go back to the 8 conference games format anyway.
So you think if there's 18 teams in a conference, they're going to play 8 conference games?
8 or 9. I don't see the Big Ten going back to 8 right now. I could see them sticking at 9. I could easily see them sticking at 9. Because at what point, why would you want to play 10? Because one of the things about college football is also Ohio State plays Notre Dame, Toledo, and Arkansas State this year. I think Toledo. Toledo and Arkansas State, those are money games. Those games, Ohio State cuts a check for at least $1 million, maybe $1.5 million, sometimes $2 million and that helps fund those athletic departments. So if these schools and these conferences say we're going to play 10 conference games, these other schools are going to be like, how are we going to function as an athletic department? It's a bad business move to me to use another game where you're going to play and you're going to get beat really bad and say that loss is going to fund us for the entire year. But that's the nature of the beast. So, and so I do think that the schedule makers realize, like, if we do this, but are you only caring about yourself? But or do you want to help other people?
They don't give a shit. If Ohio State cared about if Ohio State cared about, if these college programs, if Ohio State cared about other schools, would they have snatched USC and UCLA and left Pac-12 out for dead? Would the SEC have taken the two biggest fish in the Big 12 and had them? You know what I mean? They don't give a shit. And even if they did, who are they going to help? Who if you got two non-conference games to schedule, who are you going to schedule? Arkansas State and Toledo or Notre Dame? You already got 10. Let's say that they only do 9 conference games, which
I don't currently do.
Let's say they stay with that number. I just don't know. I don't know how they could. If you have 18 teams in your conference, let's say. So let's say if there's 18 teams in the conference, I guess I'm envisioning 9 division games. So you play the 8 teams in your division, and then 2 teams out of your division, or 3, whatever it is. I don't know. What are you envisioning? More like pods, like 6-12, like.
Yeah, they're going to go away from divisions. I didn't even realize the NCAA demanded that these schools have divisions in football. That was a really idiotic move, and I can see how they would do that if it was more of a monetary gain for the NCAA, but the NCAA does not make money off of these conference championship games.
I didn't know that they did that either, because the AAC, the big. I didn't know that either.
The Big 12 didn't because of the number of schools that they had in their conference, which allowed them to have the round robin aspect of it.
So you're saying once you have a certain amount of schools, the NCAA makes you have a conference championship?
No, it makes you have divisions in your conference.
Makes you have divisions in your conference. Okay.
They recently went away from that.
So I guess that so you can't have 6 pods. So you can have 4 pods of 4. But even then, you'd have to have some kind of tournament at the end of the schedule.
You do 6 pods of 3 if you have 18 teams.
But what are you going to do? But you can't do 3.
Is that right? That's right math? 6, 12. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but then you have 3 winners. How are you going to determine who's the winner is? Right?
Whoever has the best record. I don't think you need divisions, and I don't think you need pod. I don't think you have to have let's literally just say that there's going to be 6 pods of 3 because you're using number 18. And I got to run here in a little bit anyway.
Okay.
Let's say we have 6 pods of 3. At the end of the season, you play 12 games. You play 9 conference games or 10 conference games, and then 2 non-conference. Well, we're going to take the teams that have the winners of each pod, and we're going to have a little playoff.
Yeah.
Well, the top 2 get a bye, and then 2 6, 5, 4, and 3 play the first week. That's going to be a lot of extra games. And when you're worried about the health and safety of the players and the wear and tear on their bodies, you're going to have a playoff in your conference, and then have a playoff to get to the national championship game. You're trying to get to the NFL. I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening. I see why you're saying that. I personally don't see that happening. I do not.
That's why I think Notre Dame's going to have a hard time, because I don't see any. Unless you have 2 divisions of 9 teams and you expand how many teams you play in your regular schedule, that's it. Those are your 2 options. Either you go into divisions of 9 and you expand how many teams you play in your regular schedule, or you go into 4 pods of what did we say? 3?
6 pods of 3 if you have 18 teams.
Yeah. Okay.
Wait. Yes. Yeah. 6 pods of 3 teams.
Let's
if you have
just
18
say,
teams.
Let's just say. Well, okay. Yeah. Sure. Whatever. 6 pods of 3. So then you have your bullshit conference tournament at the end. You can't play. It's football. You can't play that many goddamn.
But you won't do that. They will not do that.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
They won't do that.
I'm agreeing with you. So but at the same time, I don't know where Notre Dame fits in the equation, because that'd be pretty goddamn ballsy if you got 2 non-conference games to be like, oh, let's schedule Notre Dame. You know what I mean?
But they only have 3 right now, and they're playing Notre Dame. In a couple of years, they're playing Texas and Washington in the same year. They're only going to have 1
but
traditional.
They still have those 2 most teams have those 2 warm-up games, right? It's just something's
so
off.
last year, Clemson played Georgia week 1.
Yeah.
There's no warm-up game. This year, Ohio State plays Notre Dame week 1. There's no warm-up game. In a couple years, I forget if it's 2024 or 2025, Ohio State's playing Texas and Washington in the same year, a 9-conference game schedule, 3 non-conference games. 2 of them are against really good powers, names and brands in college football. Only one game's going to be a weak opponent. You don't need that. Like, you don't need to have these not the main appeal for Ohio State to play these non-conference games. Well, there's 2 of them. 1, to get a little easier game. 2, cut a check for somebody else. Like, you're literally helping somebody else fund their athletic department. At the same time, when Ohio State goes on the road to play Texas or Washington, Ohio State's getting a check that game because the home team cuts a check for the visiting team in those non-conference games.
Let me ask you this, because the big debate, what we've been talking about is Notre Dame. I know you got to go here in a couple minutes, so let's figure this out. Let's put a bet on it.
Yeah.
What do you view as Notre Dame's future? Because I view them as having to join a conference. But here's my view. When the conferences go to 18 teams, the next expansion, maybe not to the SEC, because I'm assuming the SEC is going to add 2 teams, and then the Big Ten adds 2 teams. My expectation is that the next time 18 teams are added or in a conference, Notre Dame is going to be a part of that group. Is what I'm saying making sense? I'm not saying the next time someone adds 2 more teams to make 18, Notre Dame will be part of that list, but Notre Dame will be in a conference when either the SEC or the Big Team expands to 18. That is my bet. But you disagree with that? You think that they can stay strong?
I don't think they should. I don't think they should. I wouldn't say they need to. I think they'll do it.
You think they will do it?
I think they will do it out of, unfortunately, peer pressure. Like, peer pressure fuels a lot of things in our decision making in life.
But you don't think that they need to?
No. I don't. The thing I think is going to be the biggest thing with them, and I know I keep going back to TV, their TV contract, but TV is fueling all of this. Like, Fox is fueling this, ESPN's fueling this. Do they get a contract, keep their contract with NBC? If they don't, does NBC try to get a contract with another team so NBC still has college football in the fall? Those are things that I think about. Notre Dame fits NBC. I mean, we've all grown. Most of us listening to this have grown up or have seen Notre Dame play football on NBC for quite a long time.
Sure. Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter if you're in Ohio, if you're in the Midwest, if you're in Jersey, if you're in Florida, if you're out there in the Pacific Northwest, you have seen Notre Dame play football on NBC at some point in your lifetime. It's just the way the cookie has crumbled. That's just how things have been since the 90s when they got that contract. So my biggest thing is, when that happens, if they fall to peer pressure, which I think they will, do they keep that contract? If they don't, what does NBC do? And before then, what does CBS Sports do? Because I think CBS Sports can currently, right now, since they don't have the SEC, they should be in conversations with the Big Ten and say, we want you guys to be our game of the week. Because if we don't have the SEC,
CBS does have the SEC.
They lose it. I think ESPN gains all the rights to the SEC in 2024.
You are correct. I thought you meant currently. You are correct.
No. Yes. And so my thing is, I think the CBS Sports should do some things with the Big Ten, or do they say we're only going to play Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State games, USC games, your 4 biggest brands, and we'll try to figure out what game we want to pull from them to play on our network? Sounds a little crazy, Jay. You may say, Jay, you sound insane. No, what's insane is adding USC and UCLA to the Big Ten. That is still insane to me. However, we have to think outside of the box, because currently those people that are making decisions are allowing the money to fuel them. And until college football gets a governing body to rule them, this is what we're seeing right now is going to happen for a really, really, really long time. The conferences have made a lot of money on college football, and those in charge of the conferences have made a lot of money in college football. The problem is they're never on the same page. They don't even care about each other. This handshake alliance that they had instead of signing a contract came back to bite them because there was no really agreement with that. So I think Notre Dame will be in a conference, probably the Big Ten, which goes back in for decades. Notre Dame being in the Big Ten was blocked or pushed away or was denied. At some point, someone's going to say, Notre Dame, come on. We'll work with you. We already got one of your rivals here. If you want us to get Stanford, we'll bring them along as well. You could go ahead and play Michigan State, Michigan, and Purdue every year. So you're playing 5 rivals every year that are inside of our conference. It makes us stronger. It makes you look good. You're on different TV networks. Everyone's happy because everyone's making more money.
It will be interesting. It will be interesting to monitor because I think you're right. I don't think it's done.
Mm-mm.
Um, yeah, and Notre Dame is one of the big fish. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
So people are going to be fighting scratch and form. Yeah, it'll be interesting. All right, I think that was a good thing to end on. I think we both were saying the same thing. We kind of got into it a little bit with the Notre Dame conversation, but we both ended up on the same task. I think we both believe that they're probably going to end up in the Big Ten or with a conference by the time the next expansion rolls around. It'll be fun to monitor. It'll be interesting to monitor. Jay, I appreciate you coming on as always. Make sure you check out Jay Stevens on Locked On Buckeyes and the Jay Stevens podcast. Is that
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, he's got some good guests, some great guests. John Garcia's is a recruiting expert. He's got there every week. Ross Jackson from Locked On Saints, and also of Saints Wire. Everybody knows I write for Buckeyes Wire, so Ross writes for Saints Wire. He puts out some good stuff constantly. A lot of fun guests, a lot of awesome guests. You had a guy from the Colts on there earlier because you're doing a road trip. Isn't that what your segment's called?
Yeah. Took a little hiatus with stuff going on, but yeah, we're doing the road trip. Ross is back on today. Just talking about former Buckeyes and what they're going to do in the NFL's upcoming season. I'm going to try and get a show or a little segment on with Ezekiel Elliott, a little one about Justin Fields, and other Buckeyes in the National Football League as well.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite segments. I like John Garcia sometimes because it gets me, googling, who's what as far as the recruiting landscape goes. But the road trip, it's a very unique thing Jay does where he talks about every single Buckeye basically in the NFL. He had a very interesting segment about I believe it was Tyquan Lewis with the Colts, because sometimes you forget about some of those middle round guys. Oh, that guy's still in the league, or oh, this guy's doing that. He's so close. With you interview guys that are so close with the organization, they're able to tell you more things about, hey, this is where their career is at.
Yeah.
This is what's going on. Paris Campbell's another good example. That actually both the Colts guys, because those guys dealt with injuries. You don't really realize that as an outsider looking in. But I do appreciate you coming on, Jay. We'll make sure to have you on again. Maybe we'll do that draft that we talked about. But this was Ohio State of Mind. This is Josh Keatley. You can find my work at Buckeyes Wire. You can follow me on Twitter at Josh Keatley16. And Jay, I almost forgot. You can follow Jay at JStevens07. Correct?
Correct.
All right, we are out.